Hey kids, how are you? Happy Easter. And I hope you will have a very special Easter with your family. And this is the second year in a row that we have not been able to celebrate Easter in the building at church. And so I know that I'm feeling kind of tired, weary of this pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic that we are having to still deal with. I'm glad that many of you are able to be back in school, and at least for a couple days a week, at least I understand. But life is still not back to regular yet, is it? Okay. So I know that I sometimes wish that we could get back to a more usual way of living. And so I have to admit that I sometimes get tired of all the stuff that's different about life right now. Well, in stories that we often like to hear as kids, we sometimes call them fairy tales. And at the end of the story, sometimes it will end by saying, and they lived happily ever after. They lived happily ever after. Well, we often know that in real life that things aren't always happily ever after, that sometimes life is difficult and we have to keep going and figure out how we are going to make things the best they can be, okay? Well, I just want you to think about the fact that Easter tells us in God's big story of God's love for us, God's love for you, it is true that the end of God's story for us is that we do live happily ever after. We don't exactly know what all of that means, but we can trust that because of God's love for us, God indeed wants us to be happy, wants us to know that things are going to be okay. So just remember that Easter is a reminder that even when we get discouraged, when things aren't going so well and we aren't so sure that how our story is going to continue, how we're going to keep going on and making things okay, please just know that God's promise to you and me is that God is always with us, that Jesus is alive, that the worst thing that could have happened to Jesus in being crucified and dying on the cross, not even that could keep Jesus in the tomb. God's love is more powerful even than death. So please just remember that Easter story is all about you and me trusting in God's love for us, that in fact, with God's help, we can trust that our story will always be and will finally be about how everything and we are able to live happily ever after. All right? Thanks. Happy Easter. Bye-bye.